Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Bashim, Yahushai, Bashim, Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to recall a conversation I had with a financial advisor. And I thought this would be a very interesting conversation. Well, I'm sorry, lesson, because it kind of speaks to, the condition of us essentially as a people, and why basically, rulership, righteous rulership is so important. And our people essentially are very they overindulge when it comes to money, and they don't prioritize having a relationship with the Lord. So I kind of wanted to touch on this, and this is not a really a knock to money specifically. This is really a more of a knock to criticizing the system. And basically, you're basically a debt slave. That's basically what it is. And that was pretty much the conclusion of the conversation. But let me start off with this precept here, because this is not a knock to money, right? Because money is important. And it says here, Ecclesiastes 7:12, and it says, "For wisdom is a defense, and money is a defense. But the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it," right? So money is also it's also a defense, right? You can get certain things out of it. You can use it for certain things. You can use it to actually even you can even use the that physical riches to help out to gather spiritual riches, right? So it's not a bad thing. But here's the conversation. Essentially, we were talking about just talking about investments and stuff like that. And somewhere along the way, he mentioned debt, and basically how a dead person can still be charged debt. And that's something that's very common here in the West, right? There's no mechanisms put in place to actually cancel a person's debt. So essentially, when somebody dies, they basically that debt can either roll onto a next of kin, or it can roll onto the person's estate, right? So an estate is basically the assets a person has. So say for example, if you have a house, if you have let's just say for example you have a vineyard, or something that is has the ability to acquire wealth, that's basically what we're referring to here, right? So if a person, like say for example you had a loved one that passed away, and that substance essentially in Esau society, that substance, if they had some outstanding debt, then the essentially what the system is designed to basically go into that person's estate. They're basically they tap into that person's finances, that person's wealth, to be able to pay off the debt, so to speak, before basically they actually acquire any before that substance is basically passed on to the children, right? So the point is, basically Esau has to get his share first before that inheritance is passed down, right? And that's a very 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 wicked thing to do, because how is it you live in a society, this is why people essentially are in a state of mourning as well, because you don't have the substance to be able, and even if you had the substance, there's always an entity that's always involved that takes away the substance, right? Kind of keeps you poor. You always paying taxes, you know what I'm saying? right? So that's pretty much, in a nutshell. I'm just, recovering the bits and pieces of the conversation, and the scriptures describes another kind of mechanism when it comes to, um, debt, situations. What happens when, a servant, a Hebrew servant, was in debt, right? So I kind of want to go into these couple things here, and just to kind of explain why righteous rulership is really, really, important, because the scriptures say that, you know when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, and when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. And this is just one aspect of why people are mourning, because they don't have, they don't own anything. Like ownership, really, in this place, in this kingdom, ownership is really just an illusion, because nobody really owns. The mass majority of people don't own the land that house or that vineyard or whatever it is, whatever asset that they might have sits on. So even if the so-called mortgage was paid off, you know it doesn't they still have to pay like property taxes on it, right? So I wanted to get this. Let me read this here first. This is Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 33. And these were a set of curses that fell upon, our people, right? Because, we had certain periods in time, when we were basically, thriving financially, and Esau came and, did his wickedness and so on and so forth. This is Deuteronomy 28, verse 33, and it says, "In the fruit of thy land and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, and thou shalt only oppressed and crushed always," right? So, our people are in a situation where America has basically accumulated a lot of their wealth. So they don't actually get to enjoy the fruits of their labor, no pun intended. Because in the ancient times, you didn't have supermarkets as a resource, to go to. Basically you were living off the land, right? So when we went into the land, during the time of Joshua, for example, the different tribes were allotted their portions of the land. So basically, you would live off the land and the resources that you had. So maybe you might have had, maybe you had pomegranate trees, maybe you had some dates, maybe you had some fig trees, maybe you had, what I'm saying? Maybe you had some cattle, or for example, you maybe had some sheep. You can shear the sheep, you can spindle you can shear the sheep, basically, use the wool, spindle it, make clothing, so on and so forth, right? That's a business. That's a real substance. That's real riches, right? But in this situation, you Israelites, you wouldn't be in a situation where you'll be able to enjoy the fruit of your land, because our people always talk about, trying to have some kind of sovereignty, and not even just in America, but just like, even with you tribes, a lot of you tribes in the Caribbean, your puppet leaders have sold out portions of your land. So the Esau, and then as well you have Moab down there too. A lot of Esau and Moab has predominantly taken up a lot of your resources, so you don't even enjoy the fruit of those particular lands. For like, for example, I know in Puerto Rico is another one too, where it has lots of rich fertile land, but you don't actually enjoy the benefits thereof because you truly don't own it. And if you continue reading in this same chapter, scriptures say that you would have to go to your enemy for the want of all things, right? So you wouldn't be in a position of having a lot of substance. Like Esau basically would have the fatness of the earth, right? So this is the primary condition of us as a people, and our people don't see the importance of coming back to the Lord, because when you come back to that, you understand why we're in this position, and you understand that this kingdom is a place where we can't rest, right? So I wanted to read this Because I just decided to type in, can a dead person be in debt? And this is what the AI Google overview gave me. So it says here, it says, yes, a person can be still have debt after they die, but a debt is typically paid by the estate rather than the family members. It says when someone passes away, according to Credit Counseling Society, their outstanding debts do not simply disappear, but instead they come the responsibility of the dead person's estate. So back to the point, the riches that you accumulate now, those riches have to be used, those assets you have to be used to have to pay off the outstanding debt, right? And it says here the estate consists of all assets owned by the person, savings, investments, property, vehicles, so on and so forth, right? So I wanted to jump down. There was something else that caught my eye as well. Just give me 1 second. It says, oh, so then I asked another question. It says, what is the meaning of an estate when a loved one dies with outstanding debt? It says, in a legal sense, an estate is a distinct entity made up of all assets and liabilities a person leaves behind when they pass away. So when a person dies with outstanding debt, their estate serves as a financial bucket that must be used to pay off creditors before anyone can receive an inheritance. And that's very wicked, because how is it, what if there are people within that person's family that needed those resources, because that man, if you're a father, you toil and you actually have an heirloom of inheritance that was passed down and kept within your family. Now that is basically, now the government has the ability to ensure that essentially they get their cut first before anybody gets an inheritance. And the cut, and for basically, it's so messed up too, because depending on the outstanding amount of debt, that those children may not even get their particular cut, if you understand what I'm saying, right? So, what do the scriptures describe when it comes to inheritance and so on and so forth, right? So let me just read this. This is Deuteronomy 21, verse 15, and it says, if a man have two wives, one beloved and one hated, and they have borne him children, both beloved and the hated, and if the firstborn son be hers that was hated, then it shall be, when he maketh his sons to inherit that which he hath, that he may not make the son of the beloved firstborn before the son of the hated, which is indeed the firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the son of the hated for the firstborn by giving him a double portion of that he hath. For he is the beginning of his strength, and the right of the firstborn is his, right? So there's no entity that comes in place that gets their portion of those resources. It gets passed on to those particular sons, right? But in this society, for example, if a dead person, if you had a family member that passed away, and that inheritance that might be passed on, the system has to make sure, okay, they get their cut first before anybody gets their slice of the pie, right? So essentially you're kind of defrauding, you're kind of taking away the substance that belongs to a family. And Esau is really wicked for that, because he's really and truly a niggard, and this is why a lot of people are in a state of mourning, right? But let's just say, for example, if that man didn't have sons. I wanted to get this here, going more into inheritance. So So this is Numbers chapter 27, excuse me, verse 6. As a matter of fact, I'll read verse 1 and I'll jump down to verse 6 just to kind of establish context. And this is a law of inheritance. And it's saying, and it says, then came the daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hefer, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, of the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. So this is within the family, right? And it says here, these are the names of his daughters, Malah, Noah, and Hoglah, and Milcah, and Tisra, right? So jumping down, and it says, and the Lord Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, the daughters of Zelophehad speak right, sure thou shalt surely give them a possession of an inheritance among their father's brethren, and thou shalt cause the inheritance of their father to pass unto them. And thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel, saying, if a man die and have no son, then ye shall cause his inheritance to pass unto his daughter, right? So it's ensuring that that inheritance gets passed on to, either the son, if he had sons, or if he was in a situation and a man had daughters, then that inheritance got passed on to the daughters. There was no entity that comes in and takes their fair share, whatever it is, of the outstanding debt, right? There is a it ensures that the inheritance stays within the people who are supposed to inherit that substance. You know what I'm saying? There's no other legal force that you might have to deal with, because when it comes to situations, when it comes to inheritance, there's always this other separate entity that always has to, be involved in certain commercial transactions. You know what I'm saying? When it comes to land, when it comes to, the acquiring of farms, when it comes to, all this stuff that, our people want to buy because they want to achieve a certain kind of sovereignty, because they realize in their spirit that, they don't have a lot of economic strength. It's to ensure that those resources stay within the family, right? This is verse 9. So this is Numbers chapter 27, verse 9. And it says, if a man hath no daughter, then he shall give his inheritance unto his brethren. If he have no brethren, then he shall give his inheritance to his father's brethren. And if his father hath no brethren, then he shall give his inheritance to his kinsman, that is next to him of his family, and he shall possess it, and it shall be unto the children of Israel a statute of judgment, as the Lord Yahweh commanded Moses. So essentially, the inheritance is supposed to stay within the family, but this is what Esau does, right? Esau doesn't regard the ways of the Heavenly Father, right? He essentially, as it says in Psalms, he covet. Let me get it. Hold on. Basically, he despises, the Lord's instructions, and take that covenant into his mouth, to roughly paraphrase. Psalms 50. This is Psalms 50, verse 16, and it says, but unto the wicked the Most High Yahweh saith, what hast thou do to declare my statutes, that thou shouldest take my covenant in thy mouth, seeing thou hatest instructions and casted my words behind you. So, they portray themselves to be a people that actually is following, claims that they follow the ways of the Lord, but when it comes to works, their works are far from, the ways of the Heavenly Father, right? The scripture, as a matter of fact, it was Yahushua that said a tree is known by its fruits. And when you go into that word fruits, it refers to the word karpos, meaning works and deeds. And this is the deeds that happen. Your children, if you have children in this society, then you have to worry. If you have some debt and you pass away, then those children don't get, and this is why a lot of our people, don't have anything. This is the kind of condition of the battle that you have to deal with, because he's getting his fair share first. And think about the the people that have a lot of substance, entertainers, celebrities. Let's use Michael Jackson as an example. How much of those resources stayed within their family? How much of the royalties that you have, James Brown and Prince and Ray Charles, all these different celebrities, we're basically like Lazarus, just eating the crumbs off the master's table, you know. So let me get this in Baruch. Let's go here. 1 second. This is Baruch chapter 3, verse 8, and it says, "For yet we are in this day, yet our captivity, where thou hast scattered us, for a reproach and a curse, and to be subject to payments, according to all the iniquities of our fathers, which departed from the Lord, our power." So we're in a situation where we're subject to all these, still payments, right? So you still, even if you have a family member that might have had some substance and they pass away, they still have to, make their payments. There's no mechanisms that are put forth in this kingdom when it comes to the cancellation of debts, right? It's really just about keeping people in debt. That's really how the society functions, right? There is no debt forgiveness. And I wanted to touch on two things real quick before I close off. So this goes into the sabbatic year. So after the 6 years, like for example, after those 6 years, or when you go through that period of a person working, or even like when it comes to the land Sabbath, you have a mechanism that's putting forth on on the 6th year, you're on the 7th year, I should say, Salak. The 7th year, basically there would be a release, right? So this is Deuteronomy 15:1, and it says, "At the end of every 7 years thou shalt make a release." And it says, this is the manner of the release. It says, "Every creditor that lendeth unto his neighbor shall release it. He shall not exact it of his neighbor or of his brother, because it is called the Lord's release," right? So there are situations where you might have had Hebrew servants, right? Men or women, they were doing their servitude for those 6 years. The 7th year, they're to be released, right? Let me jump down to verse 12. It says, if thy brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years, then the 7th year you shall let him go free from thee, right? So there were mechanisms that were put in place to essentially, when the 7th year came around, that sabbatic year, that year was very important, because then you realize, okay, this person has to go free now, right? There is a certain level of debt forgiveness, because there were situations where a lot of our people might have fallen into debt, right? But in this society, you don't, there's no so-called debt forgiveness. You know what I'm saying? Even after you're dead, that's just wicked, man. You're just constantly oppressing the people, and this is why a lot of the people don't like. This is and that breeds. What does that breed? It breeds a very distaste for the rulership thereof, right? It breeds a distaste. It breeds spirits creative of vengeance. It breeds certain seeds of sedition. Why they won't? When you read about 2 Ezra 15, when you come with dealing with the resources and taking away a man's resources, when you think about these things, it actually makes sense. Why a lot of people are going to be on edge, why a lot of people are going to be in a very seditious spirit, why they won't regard their kings nor their princes, right? And this is a continuous phenomenon ever since the Demic situation that happened a couple years ago, right? So um that's pretty much the point, I kind of wanted to hit, because this is a society where people, they try, especially our people, they try and accumulate a lot of like substance, but because of the mechanisms that are put forth in place, a lot of you Israelites are going to be very, very disappointed, because you don't actually acquire true substance in this society, right? Let me end off with this last one. This is Hebrews 13 verse 14, and it says, "For here we have no continuing city, but we seek one to come." Right? So this is not a place that's healthy to stay in, right? This is not a place where you can actually accumulate wealth, right? And it's not even real, it's not even wealth of intrinsic value. That's another thing also, right? So the scriptures say to remember now thy creator in the days of thy youth, right? So yes, money is a defense. Yes, the Lord blesses you with it. All praises to Yahweh Bashim Shai, but it's not there's no such thing as financial freedom. Financial freedom is a complete myth, right? You're really not actually free. Yahweh Shai said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free," right? So the only thing that really makes us free, is actually understanding that there is something more to come, rather than this hell, man. Because even in debt, you're still a slave, right? So you know so I'll just leave the lesson there. But Lord's will, this lesson was actually edifying. I just wanted to just put that out there. I know it was kind of all over the place, but hopefully it all pieced together and made sense, right? So Lord's will, this was just quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.